COVID threw us all for a loop. However, I was always thankful I wasn't in the world of education. In this episode, I talked to someone who not only was, but still is. Her story is a fantastic exploration of the impact of crisis on leaders. How did she navigate state mandates, parent expectations, student safety, workforce needs, adherence to the mission of a private Christian school, as well as stay healthy and sane in her own personal world? You'll hear about all of that as we dive into this conversation right now. Thank you for joining me for this podcast. Why don't you let those listening know who you are, what you do, and how long you've been doing it.
So I'm Annie Burnham, and I'm a wife, a mother of two, and I am the administrator at New Hope Christian School. I started out 13 years ago teaching at New Hope and taught full-time for 5 years. And then when I started having children, was able to continue working part-time in the administrative realm and really enjoyed it. One of my mentors encouraged me in that direction. And so I went back to school. I got a master's in educational administration. And for the last 4 years, I have been full-time as the head administrator.
What did you teach 13 years ago?
I taught middle school Bible, history, English, high school chemistry, the drama class. It was a big variety of things, but mostly middle school students.
Yeah. What got you into teaching?
I actually, when I was younger, swore that I would not become a teacher. My mom's a teacher, my aunt is a teacher, my grandpa is a teacher and was a principal. And so I wanted to do my own thing and not follow the family footsteps. And somehow the Lord brought me back to teaching in different ways. I always enjoy interacting with kids and had a period of time where I was unemployed and ended up substitute teaching and spent a year doing that and discovered that I really do enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And that led me into applying for the position at New Hope.
Mm-hmm. So what year did you start as the boss?
The boss. I started in 2019. The summer of 2019, the head administrator position came open. Ideally, I would have loved to step into the position a few years later when my kids were a little older, but when the position became available, I thought, well, did some praying, talked with my husband, decided that it was the time to step into that. So I started summer of 2019, just in time for... Yes.
That's right. 2020 is coming up.
2020, and I didn't even get through a full school year before having to deal with a worldwide pandemic.
Yeah. So that's one of the parts of your story I did want to hear about for myself, but also I thought listeners would enjoy hearing about that. Talk about the moment when it hit you, what COVID was going to mean for New Hope.
Yeah, I don't watch the news much. I try to stay away from news sources, especially kind of mainstream news. And
how come?
So for me, I think it is good for my mental health. Obviously, I want to be aware of what's going on in the world, and I do have sources I trust for news, but I think mainstream media, we just found, was always doom and gloom and negative. And as we had kids, there were things they showed on the news that we didn't want them exposed to, so we consciously chose not to be watching the news every evening and to find our news sources elsewhere. So, of course, I had heard that there was this virus going around in China and kind of had some sense that, it would reach the U.S., it would affect people, but thought maybe it would be like when we've had flu outbreaks and we'd have some kids out of school more than usual, but really had no expectation that it would be what it ended up being. I don't think anybody knew what it was going to end up being. But I remember getting an email from a parent in January of 2020 asking what were New Hope's plans for the coronavirus and how were we going to protect the kids and were we going to be making any changes? And in January, it had barely reached the US. There were some cases, I think, in Washington. So in my mind, I'm thinking, well, I don't know that we need to make changes or what needs to happen. But something about the tone of that email, there was an urgency and a realization that this was something that I couldn't be passive on and wait and see. I needed to be proactive in looking at what other schools were doing and really digging in more to what was going on with the virus around the world. And so it was in January that we started talking as an administrative team, what were maybe some contingency plans or how we would handle what might be coming. And even then, we didn't really know what that was going to look like.
Was there guidance available, or were you just kind of trying to patch together some contingency plan based off of what you know about, like, flu season,
Yeah, at that point, there wasn't really any guidance. I don't think schools had started shutting down or going to remote learning. So really, it was talking about things like, doing extra disinfecting and at what point would we maybe cancel school for a few days if we had a certain percentage of our students out sick, which we'd considered those kinds of questions in the past with the flu and different illnesses. So it was those kinds of questions. The idea of the school completely shutting down and remote learning hadn't crossed anyone's mind at that point. It was just, how do we keep the school clean, keep kids healthy, those kind of questions.
So when things shut down, I'm trying to remember, was that, I think we all had to shut down, right?
Yes.
So there was a choice that you didn't have to make, really, initially. But how was that? And did you have to then really quickly invent something for the kids to do during that shutdown? And then when that was done, I mean, what were some of those decisions that you remember having to make that you, looking back, you saw were pretty, pivotal to New Hope's story through COVID?
Yeah. It was March of 2020. I think we all actually remember, I think it was a Friday the 13th in March of 2020 that we got the news that we were going to need to shut down. And it was would have been a week shutdown. And then we had our spring break. So our thought was, okay, for this next week, how can we pivot? What can we do to transition just for a week of kids being at home? So teachers were sending home packets with paper worksheets and assignments and, putting those things together frantically on that Friday so that students would have work to do over the week. And then as that 2-week shutdown became a month, and then that month became till the end of the school year, each one of those changes, we had to readjust what we were doing and develop a Zoom schedule for high school students so they could still meet with their teacher and get the information they needed. And really, as a small school, I think we had an advantage in being able to transition easier than some of the larger schools. And within the week back after spring break, we had most things planned out that we were able to continue for the rest of the school year as far as how we were going to do remote learning. A lot of elementary teachers continued using paper packets and would deliver them to parents' homes and they'd do a no contact exchange, and they'd pick a packet up off the front porch and leave one for the next week. So our teachers showed so much dedication during those last few months of the school year to keep education going for our students, and make the best of it, and hoping and praying that we would just do it till the end of the school year, and then by the next fall we would be able to be back to normal. So that was the hope.
Did you find yourself, I'm thinking you have parents, you have teachers that you're also wanting to kind of take care of. You have the students, which are kind of the front and center. You also have other staff. You have different opinions about what people should be doing as it relates to, like, listening to or not to the governor. I also know that you have a bit of I don't know if you still have, do you have international students at the school at this time?
We did. We did that. We had 7 to 10 international students that school year, and they all had to go home early. They had to leave, in April, and weren't able to finish out the year. Some of them weren't able to graduate, who were seniors, and were hoping to graduate with our senior class. So that was hard too, and really uncertain for them. And we heard very interesting stories back from them about their travels home and quarantining when they got back to their home country. And it was just I think the word we used a lot was just such an unprecedented time. Things we'd never seen happening before.
Did you feel like you were in the middle of trying to make a lot of people happy, or
Yes, absolutely. There were opinions, obviously, on extremes on both sides, and lots in the middle. And early on, I think there was more of a sense of, yes, this is what we all need to do for the sake of getting through this, and so we'll shut down, we'll wear the masks, we'll do all of this. There was definitely more buy-in, and a sense that is what needs to happen in 2020 when we closed at the end of that school year. But I would get emails, with all different sorts of opinions, and some expressed kindly and some not. And I think for a lot of people, there was just a sense of fear and unknown, and that came across in the way they were expressing what they thought should be happening in the circumstance.
So how do you deal with, like, when you feel in the middle and you have lots of different pressures coming from different sides, and you're also the one, well, I don't know how the decision-making architecture goes, but I would assume there are points where you were the one who had to make a call on something, and you knew that, for me, I'm always like, am I making the right decision or not? And that really weighs heavy on me. But I don't know, like, how did you deal with those moments? What kind of got you through?
Yeah, I definitely felt a lot of stress and pressure around making decisions that would affect the education of our students, potentially the health of our students and their families. I mean, there was a huge weight of responsibility that I felt, and I'm extremely thankful for the team that I have around me. So the school board was a huge support in making a lot of those decisions and weighing the pros and cons of different options, and trying to distill down what is the best for us as a school, for our students. How do we continue to serve the Lord and fulfill our mission in the middle of this? So the school board and my administrative team, there's 3 of us who meet together at least weekly. And so a lot of these decisions were made together, and we had a lot of good, wise counsel and input and ability to weigh what was the best decision. But then ultimately it did come down to me to communicate that decision, and I dealt with the majority of the feedback, positive or negative. And so I was the buck stops here person for those decisions. So I was thankful for the team in the decision-making process, but then I had to kind of deal with the ramifications of those decisions.
So how did you, what did you learn about yourself in dealing with that? Because it's true that, it all kind of does, people need a place for it to go. And if you're, and it's so yeah, how was that?
It was hard. I would say it is one of the hardest, most challenging times of my life. I think the uncertainty of what was happening with the pandemic, and in a lot of these decisions, not knowing what the consequences would be. Truly, were we jeopardizing people's health if we made this decision on this side, or were we affecting our students' education on the other side, and not knowing what the consequences ultimately would be. So there was a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of times where I didn't know what to do and what was, quote unquote, the right decision. But there was a lot of prayer involved, a lot of seeking counsel. I even reached out to, pastors and other Christian leaders I know to get their input on the decisions they were making for their ministries and how that might relate to what we were doing at the school. But then ultimately we do have to make that call and make a decision and work through the consequences. So I actually, during that time, had a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, and kind of came to a place where I was not healthy mentally, even physically. Wasn't sleeping well, wasn't eating well, just it was very challenging.
Were you aware of that? Like, I am not healthy right now. Like, or were you, or was that more in retrospect?
I got to a point where I was, I think, the first year when we came back to school in the fall of 2020, and there were all of these mandates, and most schools were still not in person, they were remote. And so there was a sense of, well, if we just power through, if we get through this year, and I think that was my mentality for a while, I've just got to power through, just got to keep carrying on, even though I'm feeling this stress, I'm feeling this anxiety, but if we can just make it through, get to the end of this year, and then things will go back to normal. There was always that hope of normal, whatever that is. So I think it took me a while, a year or more, to realize how much things had been affecting me, and not just me, but my family, my marriage, and not that we were really struggling, but it did affect my husband as well.
Yeah.
And to see me in that state, and he was very helpful in conversation, saying, I don't know if you realize how this has changed you or affected you, and what I see from you in the evenings when you're at home. And so he was a really good sounding board too of how things were going. And so after a year or so, there was a realization of something needs to change, or I'm going to burn out. I won't be able to continue doing this. And did have talks and conversations with my husband of if even not being in that position anymore was what I needed to do, if it was going to continue to be how it had been and be creating that stress. And, I'd never in my life really dealt with anxiety. And during this time period, it was something that I felt physically. I felt the rapid heart rate and inability to sleep, and my mind just not being able to shut down, and for months at a time. And I think it's given me some empathy, and I can relate better with people who do deal with anxiety, and was able to find some tools to help and to get back to a healthy place. And I feel like I'm in a much more healthy place now. But it did take, hitting a place where I felt like I just wouldn't be able to continue.
So what worked and what didn't work as far as moving to a better place?
Yeah. Well, I think what didn't work was kind of the trying to, in my own strength, just power through and suck it up, I guess, and just keep going, and ignore the things that were going on within myself, within my family, and the toll that was taking, and waiting for something external to change. Well, when the mandates are lifted, or when we're back to normal with school, then things will be better. Coming to a place of, I think, admitting that I needed change, or I wouldn't be able to continue. Talking about that with our admin team at school, with the school board, what can be changed, whether it was, we actually brought in someone to help support me with a greater legal knowledge of what we could and couldn't do as a private school, and helped in our conversations with the Oregon Department of Education and OSHA, and so that I didn't have to be that person that was, fielding all of those challenging things and things that were completely outside of what I ever thought I'd be doing as a school administrator. I had zero experience with. So getting some support in those areas was helpful. And then reevaluating everything that was on my plate and that had been put on my plate throughout COVID, and kind of redistributing as administrators what we were doing, bringing in an assistant for me. So just kind of looking at the reality of my day and my workload and what it had become. So paring that back a little bit has been really helpful. And physically getting more healthy, and, actually going to the doctor and saying, I think my adrenals, they looked at hormones and things like that had just gotten really out of whack through all of this. And, doing some supplements and things to help me be able to sleep better and just get those natural, healthy cycles back on track. And I think, the way the Lord made our body to work, that I had been just burning out and not paying attention to.
Yes. When you had that kind of get a bird's eye view of your life, understand what's on your plate, what doesn't need to be on your plate, where you need help, and you've been trying to answer questions that you're not suited to answer, so let's get someone who can. Was that something that you kind of realized on your own, of kind of taking that deep breath and I need to zoom out here? Did someone kind of check you on that, or kind of say, hey, Annie, we need to get this, we need to look at this because you're running at a pace that's not sustainable? I mean, how did you realize that was a good thing to do?
I think it was a combination of me realizing I was reaching my limit, and the people around me, my administrative team. I have a great relationship with them, and felt free enough in meetings to express feelings like, I don't think I can do this another year. I am thinking of stepping down. And, so in expressing those things, they were also able to, kind of help me step back and say, well, what if we adjust this here? And what if we make this change and help support you more in this area, so that the option doesn't have to be stay or go, but how can we make what you're doing here sustainable and, something that I can do and be healthy.
So I remember hearing that New Hope was able to go back to in-person sooner than the local public schools. In a nutshell, why was that?
Yeah, we actually had to fight for that a little bit. Within all of the guidance that the Oregon Department of Education put out, there was a section for rural and remote schools. And if you were under a certain student population and in a certain geographic area, you were allowed to be open in person. And we met the student population requirement, but we were technically too close to other schools to be open in person. But we argued and even had a lawyer take a look at the wording that the other schools around us, they're all too big to even be open. So they, we technically were the only school that could be open within the radius that we were supposed to be in. And so we decided we were going to open, and we were going to, even use their own wording in their guidance that seemed like logically we should be able to be open, because we weren't in proximity to other schools who even had the possibility of being open. And so that was one of those battles where we brought someone else in who had more legal expertise than I do and was able to really vouch for us and say, no, I think your reading of this is correct and you should be able to be open. And we just felt we discovered early on, in that initial closure in March and April of 2020, that remote learning just was not effective for students, and particularly with our Christian mission. It was really challenging to build relationship and fulfill the mission that we have as a Christian school in particular through remote learning. And so we just were very, I felt strongly that in-person education was what we were going to pursue for the sake of our students and to be able to maintain our mission as a school and forming disciples. And there's things that you can't do through a screen that you can do in in-person relationships.
Mm-hmm. I also know that because of that, a lot of parents wanted to get their kids enrolled, and so you kind of had a big burst of popularity for people who did want their kids to return to in-person learning. I'm reflecting on. I'm curious if you'd reflect on when things are suddenly in life, when all of a sudden something is suddenly successful, or things suddenly change in a good way, or as the world would define success. But you have to kind of continue to be a good steward of that, So when you're not successful, or when you are successful, you still want to be a good caretaker of what is yours to caretake. But what was that like when all of a sudden you had this big boom of interest from people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we saw that right away in the fall of 2020 when we announced, we even promoted that we would be open in person. And so we did have a lot of families seeking us out just for that fact, not necessarily that they were interested in our Christian education aspect, but that they wanted their students in a classroom and not behind a screen all day. So we almost doubled in enrollment that first year, and it's continued to grow ever since. That was interesting. And I think we held it loosely, knowing that, this increase could be due, simply due to the fact that there are families who are wanting their children in school, in person, and it may drop off later when public schools open back up.
Like during the pandemic, like nothing you were going to say, this is now normal, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we took it, with a grain of salt and kind of a wait and see mentality. But since then, we've continued to see growth. We've doubled almost all of our elementary grades and some of our middle school and high school, and are at this point optimistic and expecting that growth to continue. And our goal is to get to a point where we have 2 classrooms for each grade level, where prior to the pandemic, we had 1 classroom for each grade level. So literally doubling the size of the school. And with that comes those questions of stewardship. It's exciting, and we have more opportunity to witness and serve students and their families. We have greater opportunity to employ people and provide an environment where people can express their faith through what they're doing. We've had some instructional aides and teachers come from the public schools who were so excited that they can share Jesus and they can pray with students. And I think those are things we start to take for granted as a Christian school. And hearing someone say, I've spent years in public education, and now to be able to pair that with actually talking to students about God and that He created them with a purpose, and that was such a blessing to them. And it was refreshing, I think, to the whole staff to remember, what we get to do here is amazing. It's a huge privilege. So we had those exciting opportunities with growth, but also, the challenges just of how do we use our space well and accommodate all these classes and fit everyone in? how do we maintain our culture as a school, and who New Hope is as a Christian school. There's definitely a little culture shift, and we're getting back to who we are and why we exist. Those are the big questions we're talking about right now, and how we maintain that culture as we grow. That it's valuable to us to really have that core of Christ at the center, and that's what everything is about at New Hope.
What are some other kind of, as a leader, other kind of challenges you've had to kind of came your way because of success, because of the growth in popularity?
Yeah, we did add some more intentional, orientation elements with new staff and with new families, of really nailing down who we are, why we exist, what our policies, the reasons behind our policies, and that they have to do with the fact that we're biblically based, and just making sure up front that our staff understand that and that our families understand that. And so when we deal with a student discipline issue or an academic challenge in a certain way, it's going to come from this biblical worldview, that is who we are. That's what you can expect here. And if that doesn't line up with their priorities as a family, that maybe it's not the right place for their students. So we've had to be a little more discerning, I think, in our interview process, and then in really making sure that families have that upfront knowledge of, Christian is not just a label that we put on the school, but it is the foundation of who we are and why we operate the way that we do, and how we will interact with their children.
If there is someone listening that is beginning a difficult chapter in life, or maybe some crisis has come up, either in life or in their job, is there, based on your experiences, anything that you feel like you're now in a place you can kind of share, or what would you want to say to that person?
Yeah, I think that I would. Looking back now, I don't think a year ago I would have had this insight, but being able to look back and have a little perspective now, I see the value of prioritizing time in the Word and in prayer. And there were seasons during the last few years where I was not doing that. And it was in those times that I felt really alone. I did not feel God's presence, and felt like, almost bitterness creep in toward the Lord of why am I going through this? And
I didn't sign up for this.
Exactly. Yes. This is not what I signed up for when I took the job, and feeling like it got dumped on me, and then that I had to get through it on my own. And I see now that a lot of that was of my own making, and not allowing the Lord to speak into my life through His Word and through prayer. And in those stressful crisis moments, what seemed to me, what I needed was, I'm just going to hit snooze and sleep 5 more minutes, and that'll help me feel better to start my day. But if I had been prioritizing that time with the Lord and giving Him the opportunity to speak to me throughout the process, I think that would have carried me through better, and maybe helped me realize the negative effects that things were having on me sooner, because I had been trying to do it all myself, and now have come to just cherish that time with the Lord and understand that I need it every day. And so I think, if you're looking at a difficult circumstance in life, or a challenging season coming up, making that time a priority and trusting the Lord day by day, not looking far out on the horizon, but just that today the Lord will give me the grace that I need and the strength that I need, and He will provide for anything that comes my way. And I feel that I have grown in that level of trust with the Lord, where in the middle of everything, I really struggled with trusting the Lord with that, and with the questions of why, Lord, why do I feel alone? Why do I feel, this anxiety? I don't feel peace. And so I think really making that time to be with him is so huge.
Yeah, I'm expecting that most of our listeners are Christian, and those who maybe aren't, maybe that would be translated into just kind of a bit of that theme that you were talking about earlier with the school and onboarding new people into the culture. But on a personal level, hanging on to your values, hanging on to what makes you do what you do on at a very personal level, and just really trying to stay connected to those roots of yourself. In the midst of that, as a Christian, spending time with God, what does that rhythm look like for you that you've kind of found really meaningful in the crisis, and maybe has continued on? That you said that time that you cherish. What does that look like?
Yes, yeah. For me, it looks like setting my alarm a half an hour earlier than I would, would probably want to otherwise, to make it a priority, and really the time in the Word. And I enjoy just reading straight through the Bible and the whole of God's Word. And it was back in May or so of last year, getting back into daily reading, and just started in Genesis and read through, and just a couple weeks ago finished up Revelation. So we've gone through the whole Bible, and I like doing it at a faster pace. I think there's benefit in intentional, really in-depth study of a book, but I've found that as I'm reading 10 or 12 chapters a day and getting through books quicker, I see the overarching story and the picture of what God is doing and how things fit together. And I so often find things that just speak to exactly where I am in life. And it might be in Second Chronicles, or, a book that you wouldn't think of as, this is where I go for, for inspiration, but that I have found in every book of the Bible, God speaks to me. And so I'm excited this time through. I'm doing a chronological plan.
Okay.
And I'm excited to see where.
Are you buying like an actual chronological Bible, or is it like on your phone?
No, I just threw an app on my phone, following the plan. I don't read on my phone. I read in my actual Bible and mark things as I go. But I've done a chronological study before, and I just enjoy seeing where the prophets fit in with the kings, and what's going on in Israel and why these prophecies were given. I just feel like seeing that chronological story is really neat. So
you wake up a half hour early. Are you spending a half hour reading 10 to 12 chapters?
Pretty much, yeah. And that morning time, I do mostly read. I don't spend a lot of time in prayer. Other than,
Sure. But you're not like closing the Bible and then, yeah, you're right. I hear. Yeah.
And actually for me, I think that is my biggest challenge, is making intentional time for prayer. I find myself praying throughout the day for different things, but making that intentional time to pray is something that is a challenge for me.
Yeah. We are in January of 2023. As you look ahead to this year, is there anything personally and or professionally that's on the horizon that you're looking forward to?
Yeah. Personally, I am sounds funny, but kind of just looking forward to enjoying life, to being out from under the stress. And, I had no energy left at the end of the day to enjoy being with my kids and doing things with my family, and feel like I'm at a place now where I'm just really looking forward to being more active with my kids and enjoying life, finding joy in things again, and not feeling so burdened and stressed all the time. Yeah.
That's a sweet thing.
Yes. And I think my family feels it as well, and are grateful for it.
Yeah. And it's obvious that you're still the administrator. Is that your title?
It is, yeah, administrator.
At New Hope Christian School. So you've survived the pandemic in this role, and you said yes, to this year, and so that is something we've seen is the pandemic. Folks kind of power through to get through, and then once the crisis is gone, that we have seen folks leave their positions or go look elsewhere for jobs. But you're still here. So that must have been a decision you made.
Yes. Yeah, it was. Looking at this next school year and the changes that were starting to happen, and knowing it would be a process, but a process that I was willing to commit to for this year to work through trying, hopefully a normal year. Yeah. And so far we've been blessed to not have, mandates and closures and anything that we've had to deal with. We don't have to deal with quarantining and isolating and all of that. So really grateful to have those restrictions lifted and be able to work through a normal school year, what I thought I was going to get. Except now it's with a school that's much larger, and we have exciting growth plans. We're looking at building plans, wanting to build our programs, looking at the arts and athletics, and how do we take the growth that we've been given and be good stewards of that and move it forward, and create a really good program for our students where they can explore who they are in the Lord. And so there are exciting things on the horizon for the school as well.
Yeah, almost like a rebirth.
Yeah.
In the midst of COVID, something new emerged, and you're going to get to kind of see what that's going to look like, this new thing that is kind of happening.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, I look forward to seeing what comes of, like 2024, 2025, what will have happened in the course of this year, and look forward to seeing what else you learn in this role as you get a chance to see what does Annie Burnham do in a quote unquote normal, season as administrator of New Hope Christian.
I look forward to seeing that too.
Yeah.
I haven't had the chance yet.
Cool. Well, thank you for joining me with this conversation, and look forward to seeing what happens next.
Great, thank you.